When I spoke of the modern psyche, I observed something not trivial, but urgent. Hurry is not merely aligned with the devil. Hurry is the devil. This was not intended as mere rhetoric. Rather, it expressed a psychological fact that modern neuroscience now echoes. The quality of our attention not only frames our moment-to-moment experience, but constitutes the very structure of the psyche. To most, attention is regarded as a practical function, to focus here rather than there. But I perceived it as something archetypal, the conduit between the conscious and unconscious realms. What we attend to persistently fashions the soul's architecture. This principle, drawn from clinical analysis and symbolic observation, presents a dire warning, more prescient now than ever. Your attention is not simply contested. It is being hijacked, systematically manipulated, and wielded against your psychic integrity. This manipulation is no mere distraction. I discovered that attention serves both as a symptom and a cause within the psychic totality. Where it flows reveals the current unconscious configuration, but it simultaneously strengthens and reifies those very contents. Thus, we spiral, either toward psychic unity or toward inner schism. The gravest conflicts, when truly faced, give rise to lasting serenity. But what becomes of conflict when attention, instead of confronting it, is perpetually displaced? My clinical work revealed unsettling insights into this dilemma. The white psyche, as I came to understand it, is not a machine, but in her organic totality. An ecosystem wherein attention functions as psychic nourishment. That which is fed grows in power, that which is ignored descends into the unconscious, often to return as fate. As I wrote, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. This transformation demands intentional, prolonged attention turned inward, but modern life pulls us away. Technology and mass society externalize attention, severing us from inner wholeness. This detachment breeds what I termed psychic inflation, an identification with collective opinion at the cost of individual soul-making. The person immersed in externals becomes a stranger to their own depths, informed but not individuated. Modern neuroscience now affirms what I saw in my patients. The brain reorganizes itself around what it repeatedly attends to. This neuroplasticity, ideally in service of individuation, now cements patterns of avoidance, reinforcing attention's captivity. The results are visible. Externalized attention produces predictable psychic symptoms, shallow symbolic life, reduced contact with archetypal material, heightened projection, and susceptibility to collective possession. Mass movements, I noted, are always more unconscious and destructive than the individuals within them. In today's world, this insight becomes stark. Algorithms now function as psychic agents, capturing attention not for truth or integration, but for engagement and control. Though I did not live to see smartphones or social media, I intuited their psychological effect through earlier media. When attention is pulled outward by impersonal forces, the psyche becomes fragmented, disoriented, vulnerable. People will do anything, I observed, no matter how absurd, to avoid confronting their soul. This tendency needs no digital trigger, but today's technology refines this ancient evasion to a precision previously unimaginable. Why do we flee the soul? because the path to wholeness is marked by mild suffering, what I called the pain of individuation. To integrate unconscious contents is to endure their discomfort. Modern systems offer a smoother path, distraction in place of depth. This escape, however, extracts a psychic toll. Attention pulled outward leads to fragmentation, weakening symbolic function, eroding psychic autonomy. Individuation, I taught, is not linear, but a circumambulation of the self. That sacred circling requires steady attention, inwardly directed. But when attention is engineered to scatter, the inner journey halts. What follows is the fan provisional, life externally animated, internally inert. Most insidious is that this feels like choice. One believes they are choosing to scroll, unaware of like invisible compulsions are embedded within. I saw this long ago. The psyche, when unconscious of its drives, mistakes compulsion for freedom. This split in attention, the dismemberment of consciousness, was a key theme in my work. I distinguish between on-directed thinking, logical, verbal, and on-fantasy thinking, symbolic, imagistic. Both are vital. But modern attention capture exploits the latter while disguising itself as the former. The feed presents itself as rational content, but evokes archetypal fantasy. The result? A dissociative condition, a division of psyche from itself. But dissociation is no accident. It is the psyche's attempt to endure contradictory demands. When the conscious believes it reasons, while the unconscious is emotionally activated, the self is split. This gives rise to the psychological shadow, the hidden, unintegrated parts of the self. The greater the fragmentation, the larger the shadow becomes. And from that shadow rise anxiety, compulsion, despair, a sense of hollowness, which afflicted many of my patients. This fracturing disables the untranscendent function, the psyche's innate ability to synthesize opposites. Without attention, this capacity withers, leaving rigidity in place of renewal, defense in place of development. Even before the digital age, I saw this pattern. Now, in an environment crafted to fracture attention, the problem intensifies. And as I said, when an inner situation is not made conscious, it appears outside as fate. The fate of our time is clear: psychological dependency, reduced self-awareness, diminished sovereignty, yet there remains a path forward. In my clinical practice, I guided many through active imagination, the focused inward gaze that allows contact with the unconscious. This practice reclaims attention from its fragmentation. It asks us to face what we flee, to engage inner dialogue as the foundation of real objectivity and meaning. Only in this way can we once again become whole. Jung's insight overturned the prevailing notion that external objectivity precedes inner growth. He discovered that the capacity for sustained inner dialogue is directly proportional to one's ability to perceive the outer world with clarity. This intimate correlation reveals that fragmentation of attention is not merely detrimental to mental wellness. It fundamentally distorts one's grasp of reality. A psyche scattered across distractions doesn't simply lose focus. It loses contact with truth itself, becoming increasingly vulnerable to projection, manipulation, and what Jung termed psychic inflation, the unconscious absorption of collective ideologies without critical discernment. The antidote, Jung taught, lies in a radical reorientation, reclaiming attention not as a resource to be exploited externally, but as an inner life force to be cultivated. This does not necessitate withdrawal from the world of technology, but rather the awakening of conscious choice over how and where attention is directed. "I am not what happened to me," Jung wrote. "I am what I choose to become." And this becoming is forged through the conscious governance of one's attention. Jung's methods involved multiple layers: focused reflection on inner images and sensations, observation of emotional responses, documentation of dreams, and the technique he termed active imagination, a dialogue with the unconscious. Each of these practices demands what modernity so often inhibits: undistracted, intentional attention led by the psyche's own needs rather than the world's demands. The privilege of a lifetime, Jung said, is to become who you truly are. But this becoming is impossible without attention sovereignty, the ability to guide focus from within, unclouded by external coercion. The path begins by recognizing how attention has been fragmented and commodified, and reclaiming it as the sacred vessel of the soul's evolution. In Jung's view, psychological maturation begins with a paradigmatic shift, from seeing attention as passive to seeing it as active nourishment for inner life. "The attentive play of imagination," he wrote, "liberates man from bondage to the nothing but, the materialist reductionism that strips experience of meaning. Attention, rightly directed, restores access to the symbolic realm,
where reality becomes saturated with depth. This restoration requires cultivating what Jung called the symbolic attitude, a readiness to see beyond surface appearances and into the mythic significance they conceal."
Such an attitude slows down the compulsion to interpret hastily, allowing experience to unfold in its own rhythm. Jung noticed that those who developed this capacity demonstrated great psychological resilience, even amid outer turmoil. Through this symbolic lens, unconscious material could be transformed rather than suppressed, flexibility restored where rigidity once reigned. Next, Jung emphasized the importance of the container, a psychic vessel that allows opposites to coexist. Without immediate resolution, this container is forged through the very act of sustained attention to that which the ego normally rejects. Holding conflicting impulses without rushing toward clarity, one builds strength. The greater the tension between opposites, Jung said, the more energy is born of their union. Properly held, this tension becomes the engine of transformation, rather than anxiety or repression. Lastly, Jung extolled the transformative power of ritual, not as mere habit or hollow repetition, but as a rhythmic structure of consciousness, a sacred choreography of attention. For Jung, rituals were not about conforming to societal expectations or external displays of piety, but about forging internal coherence. "In all chaos there is a cosmos," he wrote, reminding us that beneath the surface disorder of life, an underlying pattern waits to be discovered. Rituals, then, become psychological sanctuaries, carefully tended spaces where attention is not scattered, but gathered, not reactive, but intentional. Through practices like dream work, solitary reflection, symbolic art-making, or acts of mindful contemplation, the psyche finds a place to breathe, a place where meaning is invited rather than chased. In an age of disintegration, where information overwhelms, where attention is a currency traded by algorithms, where speed is often mistaken for progress, such rituals offer refuge. They offer coherence where fragmentation dominates, and they grant access to depth in a culture addicted to surface. These aren't grand ceremonies, but intimate acts of attentional care. They bring the soul back to itself. Thus, Jung's psychology offers not a nostalgic retreat from modernity, but a radical reorientation within it. It initiates an attention revolution, a shift away from the passive surrender of awareness to external forces, toward a conscious reclamation of attention as the sacred medium through which the soul matures. This is not about rejecting life's demands, nor is it about escaping society's noise. It is about returning to the inner compass, to the knowing that comes not from headlines, trends, or likes, but from the quiet whisper of the unconscious. Man's task, Jung wrote, is to become conscious of the contents that press upward from the unconscious. That task is not metaphorical. It is a lived reality. And it begins with attention. For how else can one become conscious except by paying attention? The emergence of soul, the unfolding of meaning, the very evolution of human consciousness, all occur in the subtle, moment-to-moment direction of attention. Where attention goes, consciousness follows. This reclamation doesn't require isolation from the world. It doesn't ask us to become monks or mystics unless we are so called. Rather, it invites us to participate in modern life with a new kind of awareness. It asks us to align our intention with our attention. That alignment begins with simple, disciplined practices, what Jung considered essential exercises of the psyche. Keeping a dream journal not for interpretation, but for communion. Engaging in spontaneous creative expression, not for art, but for authenticity. Creating spaces of silence not for escape, but for integration. And most importantly, practicing active imagination. A dialogical engagement with the images and voices of the unconscious. These practices strengthen what Jung called the muscle of attention, the psychic will to direct consciousness not in reaction to external stimuli, but in service of inner truth. In strengthening this inner musculature, one builds resilience. Not just the ability to bounce back from adversity, but the ability to remain present in the midst of it. Reactivity lessens, insight deepens, and creativity, long buried beneath noise and habit, begins to flow freely. Jung understood this attentional strength as more than a personal skill. It was a spiritual necessity. The sole purpose of human existence, he wrote, is to kindle a light in the darkness of mere being. That light does not come from knowledge alone, nor from passive reflection. It is lit by the fire of awareness, by the soul's sustained attention to its own unfolding. Only by reclaiming attention from manipulation and redirecting it toward the inner landscape can this light grow stronger. Only then does the psyche resume its evolutionary path. This revolution, this inner reorientation, is not a rejection of modern life, but a revision of our relationship to it. The world is not the enemy. Technology is not inherently destructive, but our unconscious entanglement with them is. Jung's call is not for escape, but for awakening. Attention is not neutral. Every moment of it either cultivates awareness or diminishes it. Every glance outward or inward shapes the soul. And so, we are faced with a question: who is steering our attention, and for what purpose? Jung warned us with a metaphor. The shoe that fits one person pinches another. There is no recipe for living that suits all. This is a call to individuality, to personal discernment. The path to reclaiming attentional sovereignty cannot be mass-produced. Each psyche has its own shape, its own rhythm, its own needs. Thus, every person must discover their own practices, their own sacred rituals, their own symbolic language through which the unconscious becomes known. But make no mistake, the reclamation is essential. There is no coming to consciousness without pain, Jung said. And indeed, the journey inward is not always comforting. The pain of turning attention away from addictive distractions, from curated illusions, from numbing habits. It is real. The discomfort of facing neglected parts of the self, long buried under speed and stimulation, it can be sharp. But within that pain lies possibility. Within that resistance lies renewal. For only by facing the unconscious can we become whole. The reward for this effort is not perfection. It is individuation, the gradual process through which a person becomes psychologically integrated, aligned, and whole. This wholeness is not static. It is dynamic, alive. It expresses itself as emotional balance, reduced projection, creative vitality, and the capacity to live from depth rather than surface. A person who has reclaimed their attention has reclaimed their power, not the power to dominate others, but the power to choose, to feel, to create, to love, and to grow. Jung's call is as urgent now as it was nearly a century ago. Either we use attention to evolve, or we surrender it and become slaves to what captures it. There is no neutral ground. Every moment of attention flows either towards psychological sovereignty or towards psychic fragmentation. It flows either into the soul's integration or into the machinery of manipulation. Your vision will become clear, Jung wrote, only when you can look into your own heart. Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakes. In a world engineered to hijack our gaze, to look within is no longer just a therapeutic act. It is a revolutionary one. To choose inner life over surface distraction is to reclaim the very ground of freedom. The mastery of attention is the mastery of self. It is the foundation of psychological freedom, the root of spiritual clarity, and the gateway to a life not driven by habit or external noise, but animated by soul. In that mastery, we discover not only who we are, but who we are capable of becoming. And that, perhaps, is Jung's greatest gift, the reminder that the journey toward wholeness begins with a single act of attention, directed inward toward the heart of the self.